I pray that God's word is spoken and that God's word is heard. Amen. Please be seated. This story of the raising of Lazarus is a powerful story to hear on this, which is essentially our last Sunday in Lent. But the story of the prefigurement of the resurrection brings with it such an incredible range of detail and nuance. There are even some almost funny moments in this story. It's far and away my favorite Lenten Gospel, especially after we've had week after week after week of these long stories. This might be the longest from John's Gospel during this particular season. It's a powerful story, especially when we remember the unique qualities of John's Gospel. Remember, John's Gospel, of the four canonical Gospels, is the one in which Jesus' divinity and humanity is least ambiguous. From the very opening sentence of that Gospel, the evangelist is clear and wants us to be clear just who Jesus is. Sing this with me if you know it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, right? The Word was God. Fully human, fully divine, this Jesus. And so when we hear this story of Jesus' beloved friend dying, and Jesus' response to his death, we learn a lot about Jesus, and we learn a lot about God. We also learn a lot about grief. You can almost watch the stages of grief play out in Jesus. There's denial, there's anger, there's bargaining. And then it all wraps up rather nicely because Jesus is God. And yes, indeed, that crowd was not wrong when they said, could not this guy who cured the man born blind have stopped him from dying? Well, yes, he could. And Martha and Mary both point that out, don't they? In their own grief, we hear them say, if you were here, you could have healed him, but you weren't, right? What's also interesting about this story from John's Gospel is it flips John's usual rhetorical practice, which is to have Jesus do a sign and then follow with a big discourse explaining that sign. Remember, there'll be the feeding of the 5,000, then there's a whole lot of talk about what that feeding meant. Remember the whole 6th chapter of John's Gospel, which I think it was last summer we spent 6 weeks in the 6th chapter of John's Gospel, all that bread of life, right? Sign and then discourse. But in this case, it's flipped, right? There's this incredible discourse, this incredible conversation. First between Jesus and his disciples about what this is all about, and then with Jesus and Lazarus' sisters, who he also loves, Mary and Martha. Martha explicates quite the comprehensive theology of resurrection, doesn't she? She's got this one. She just doesn't want to wait that long. And she's really mad that Jesus didn't do for her brother what he's done for all those other folk. And we can understand that. Haven't we felt that? Most of us, by the time we've reached this place in our lives, have wrestled with significant grief. So the story rings very true to that part of us that has known death in our lives and has experienced grief. Something really important happens in this story, and it can easily get overlooked because of the lameness of this translation. The most favorite gospel verse to be memorized by confirmation teenagers around the world, Jesus wept, sounds so gentle, minor, like a kind of one hanky cry. Or maybe if you just sort of looked up and didn't blink, tears wouldn't roll kind of cry. But in the Greek, this is an ugly cry. In the Greek, he bursts into tears. In the Greek, he is torn up. This isn't a little bit of sadness, friends. And you might wonder at this. I mean, in John's gospel, partly because John is so clear about Jesus' divinity, Jesus knows all the things. He knows the whole story. He knows, frankly, from the beginning of that discourse with the disciples, what's going to happen. He's going to let them die for the sake of showing them the glory of God, and so that folks will believe, because that's actually the whole point of all of John's gospel. We hear the evangelist tell us at the very end, there are more stories I could have told you about this guy. Fill all the libraries in the world. But I'm telling you these. Why? So you'll come to believe. So Jesus is going to do this, let this unfold, let his beloved friend Lazarus experience death so he can resuscitate him and people will believe. And yet, in that moment, he still experienced gut-wrenching grief, which gives us a chance to wonder, is he grieving for all the grief around him? It sounds like divine empathy, which tells us something about Jesus, but it also tells us something about God. That empathy is a quality of the divine, not a weakness, as some might try to convince us. It's a quality of God's very own nature. There isn't a Garden of Gethsemane scene where he's dripping blood in John's gospel. Again, he goes into his crucifixion pretty confident, actually. Is this his moment when he's weeping for himself? Is this John's Gethsemane moment here, not in Gethsemane, but in Bethany? Is he weeping for us? Because although he knows that he will conquer death and death will not have the last word, death has not gone away, which we know all too well. And clearly so does he. He can help us conquer death, but he can't prevent us from going through it or experiencing grief when those we love die. And maybe that is the cause of his gut-wrenching sobs as well. But it's really clear that the Word made flesh, who dwells among us, who took on flesh for us, feels what we feel with us. So as we head into Holy Week, it's just around the corner. I hope we've given ourselves the time to grieve. If we want to be more like Jesus, we must. Now, we humans aren't so great at that in this culture particularly. Western culture in general. Can think of any number of traumas we collectively have experienced as a people that we haven't dealt with, either because we didn't have the tools or because it wasn't expedient to let us process our trauma. I mean, after September 11th, we really didn't get to deal with our trauma, did we? We were told, buck up, go to Disneyland, or the terrorists will have won, right? Get back to normal. If we don't get back to normal, it'll mean they won. So we did, right? We moved on. And we, as a country, never really processed what happened to us, like many other traumas we hadn't processed before. This idea of trauma-informed care has not been in the lexicon very long, and it certainly hasn't been in our lexicon as a society. Or the trauma of the pandemic that every one of us experienced. But again, have not really been led as a community, as a society, to process what happened to us, to really mourn what we lost. And so we still strike out angrily about things that aren't the way they used to be, and we get mad, but we don't actually allow ourselves to feel what's underneath that mad, do we? And these are just a couple of our collective traumas and griefs we haven't quite processed together as a people. And so many more inside each of us as we do the hard work of living this life as people, and people who love, people who grieve. So my prayer for us, before we encounter and come face to face with the crucifixion of Jesus in the Passion narrative next week, and then again on Good Friday, we've given ourselves a chance to find those valleys of dry bones within us and our lives, and to identify them, to find those tombs, maybe where we are bound like Lazarus. So when Jesus calls, come out, unbind him, we know what is being and who is being set free. The readings this week are full of opportunities for us to take into some meditation and prayer and do our work and make ourselves ready for what is to come. Even praying through Psalm 130, make it that maybe a morning prayer or an evening prayer for us, especially as our soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen for the morning, more than watchmen for the morning. Indeed, Jesus has promised us new life. Just as he gave Lazarus, new life is possible for us. Healing and grace is possible, even in our valleys of dry bones. But you know what's interesting to me that I heard for the first time when I was preparing for this sermon? And I've heard this passage so many times, and I have a deep personal attachment to Ezekiel 37 for all kinds of reasons, beyond the scope of this particular sermon. Talk to me on the patio. But, it strikes me this time that those bones come back together, and they get their ligaments and their tendons, they get their muscles and their flesh, and there they are. It's a body on the outside, but it's not alive without the breath of God. It's not alive until the Spirit inhabits them. It's kind of like pushing ahead and just being tough and not letting ourselves grieve, looking whole when we're not. Letting God in to do that work, to feel all the feels, to invite God into those broken places so that healing and grace can emerge. And when we hear his voice, unbind them, let them go, we know we will truly be free.